Hello, Collective. Welcome to this continued discussion on growth and growth planning. This video snippet discusses one of the foundational concepts that frames your growth plan and growth planning process. That is, your growth priorities. The first step in developing your growth plan is establishing your growth objective or objectives. This in turn requires you to determine the type of growth you wish to pursue and the magnitude of that growth. The type of growth and the magnitude sets the stage for your growth plan and frames your growth planning process. The types of growth can be characterized along three dimensions: growth perspectives, growth priorities, and growth processes. This lesson will focus on what priority growth should have in the planning process of the organization. It is known that growth is important. The question becomes how important and when. The answers to these questions depends upon where the business is in terms of the business development process and what capital markets might currently be looking for. To help us understand when to make growth a priority or the top priority, we will listen to the voices of top professionals whose firms specialize in helping companies grow: Kate Mitchell, Matt Blumberg, and Divya Bihat. For the purposes of this discussion, a company's development will be looked at in three stages. The first stage would be pre-product market fit. The second stage would be between having reached product market fit and prior to reaching scale. And finally, having reached scale, the stage of maturity. Click above to hear insights from our experts about how growth should best be prioritized at each stage of business development.
So there's an age-old debate. Do you want to grow or be profitable? There's a debate about which one of them is right, and there's also a debate about whether that's a false choice. And some of this has to do very much with the industry you're in and how capital markets are responding to your business and your type of business at any point in time. But I think some of the underlying debate is real. Growth frequently consumes a lot of cash because you have to invest ahead of growth. So this debate about whether you want to be profitable, whether you want to grow, or how much of which is important for your business is really a point-in-time thing. There's no right answer, and it can change many times over in the course of your company's life. Being frugal early on, before there's a proven business model and before there's a lot of revenue coming in the door, is important because cash is king, because you want to preserve equity value and not have to raise too much money ahead of knowing whether you've got something.
So why is growth important? Growth is the only true signal that you have product market fit. There's a million other things that you can point to and say this might mean we have product market fit, but until you have growth, no one's going to really believe it, right? Growth means that you've made something that a lot of people want and that people want to pay for. Once you have those things, you're going to grow. More and more people are going to buy your product, and that's what product market fit looks like. Growth is, in and of itself, what differentiates a startup from a small business.
Early in a company's life, if things are taking off, you've found product market fit, and you're talking about scaling up product stability or capacity or sales and marketing, it might make sense to grow more quickly at the expense of profits.
In many cases, growth is an imperative. And there's a reason why companies with little proprietary technology but a great idea, like Airbnb or Uber, really have to scale quickly. They realize that within the first months, certainly year, everyone around the world will understand how exciting this is. And if they don't get there first, somebody else will. And that's why there's an Amazon of China instead of Amazon in China. You have to keep up because you don't want to get left behind in a market you created. A good example of this is Peet's versus Starbucks. Peet's started in 1968 in Berkeley with Alfred Peet, and it's now famous, of course, for its coffee. 3 years later, some of his employees moved from Berkeley to Seattle, and Alfred Peet even helped them think about how to roast coffee. The Starbucks team, though, had a different vision for growth. They really really saw the sense of community, how big they could be. And you fast forward, Pete's today is 200 stores. They sold in 2012 for $1 billion. That's a good amount to a company in Germany. Well, Starbucks, 22,000 stores, and they're worth $84 billion. And the lesson is, being first doesn't always mean you'll be the winner. You need to stay ahead of the race.
At any stage of your company, you need to be demonstrating growth, and that needs to show in your numbers. You need to have a track record for growth, and nothing can be a proxy for showing growth. Profitability doesn't work exactly the same way. At any given stage of your company, your profitability needs to be plausible. You need to be telling a compelling story around how your business is going to be profitable at scale. What this specifically means is don't just assume scale is going to fix margins. Demonstrating profitability means showing how that's going to happen. So I think, the hand waving and saying, and when we're at scale, our margins are going to work, that's not going to work. So any work you need to do to get your story a little bit crisper than that is worth investing in. And at a seed stage, maybe this means some back of the envelope math, taking into account some real world scenarios, maybe a couple of real world simulations that you've run. Maybe it's profitability in one market. Maybe it's profitability in some subset of your user base. You want to have some examples to show how you can be profitable and how you will scale it. But you don't necessarily need to continually invest in increasing those margins at every stage of your company.
It might make sense to grow more quickly at the expense of profits. As a business matures, it can be a little foolhardy to do that, and you can find yourself in a position where you get out way in front of yourself on expenses when the business should be generating profits. Long term, most capitalists would say businesses are valued on their future profit streams or potential for profit, and it's really in that early stage or that sort of mid stage of things are working, you've already scaled up to a certain point, but you're not huge yet, where you have to be really careful about those trade-offs. If capital markets are rewarding growth, which frequently they do, they can ignore profitability. But again, you don't want to get caught being in a position of losing too much money and having too many capital requirements when the winds change with capital markets, because you can find yourself in a really compromised position. The faster you're growing, the greater the tolerance is for losses. But again, you really don't want to find yourself at the whim of capital markets. You want to control your destiny as much as possible as an entrepreneur, and not getting too far out in front of yourself with expenses, and really feeling confident that you have your hands on the dials of revenue and expenses is really the way to go.
So in summary, in the early stages of the business, prior to achieving product market fit and/or a validated business model, growth should not be the priority. The more appropriate focus would be cash flow and achieving product market fit. In that stage between product market fit and reaching scale, the company should pursue growth at all costs, especially when there are large economies of scale and/or no protection from intellectual properties. If these conditions do not exist, then growth should have priority, but a company should be able to at least make a plausible argument for profitability. At maturity, growth is still aggressively pursued, but profitability now has priority. Looking ahead at the growth planning process, the initial steps will involve visualizing the proper perspective to have for the planning process and the priority that should be given for growth. This concludes our discussion on growth priorities, one of the three major ways to categorize growth. Goodbye, and grow fast and prosper.